Hello, my name is Olivia Mattis. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's program on the amazing life story of Mr. Albie Sachs, who's with us in person today, live from Kliptown, South Africa. So our foundation, the Sousa Mendes Foundation, honors a hero, Aristides de Sousa Mendes, who saved many lives and paid a heavy price. And he's an example of someone who enlarged the circle of his responsibility or enlarge the universe of his responsibility. And we share many stories like that of individuals who feel responsible for the world around them. And we have one such hero here today who has earned praise from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and many other distinguished leaders. So we have a moderator today, Dr. Shulamit Reinhartz of Brandeis University. So Shula, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you, Olivia, for the opportunity to interview Albie Sachs and our other wonderful guest, Abby Ginsberg. As we prepared for today's program, Abby and Albie suggested that they introduce each other. That has never been done on one of Olivia's programs, so it's already a unique experience. Would you like to start, Abby, by introducing Albie Sachs?
I just want to thank the Sousa Mendes Foundation for inviting us to be here, and thank you to the audience for joining us. So the first thing I just wanted to say was a tiny little bit of background about how I met Albie, which was in the mid-1970s when I was a law student, and Albie was living in exile in England. And he would come talk about the anti-apartheid movement with us, really was our kind of hands-on connector to that movement. And Albie was traveling the United States, both raising money and doing educational meetings with people all around the United States. So that's when I first met Albie. Then, and Albie imprints, you'll see after you meet him today online. I have a very special place in my heart for him. And when he was injured, it felt like it happened to a friend, etc. In the meantime, I had never been to South Africa. So fast forward to 2009, and that was my first trip to South Africa. And as Albie and I were parting after having had coffee together, I said, Albie, what do you think about the idea of my making a film about you? And I actually thought Albie was going to say, well, what a great idea. Let's do it. And that is not what he said. Albie said, well, let me see some other things you've done. Let me think about it. Let me make sure that your style and my life are going to fit together in a project like this. So I said, thank you very much, gave him a couple of DVDs and left South Africa. Sometime in 2009, Albie agreed to let me make this film. And so what I'm now going to do is introduce Albie, but I just wanted to sort of set the scene that Albie and I have known each other a long time, and working on a film together really brings you much closer together. So Albie and I got to know each other much more intensely as a result of working on this project.
And you'll do this rather quickly because he's going to be answering a lot of questions.
Okay. So quickly, there is no one-liner for Albie, as there are for many people, in terms of what his career has been and what his life has been. He has been a lawyer, a prisoner, an anti-apartheid activist in exile, a judge, a teacher, an author, an art lover, and an art curator for the Constitutional Court in Johannesburg, where he served with distinction for 15 years. We're going to discuss the art of the Constitutional Court a little bit later, but I just want to say, if any of you on this Zoom ever have an opportunity to go to South Africa, go to Johannesburg, look at the Constitutional Court and that art collection. Now, the other thing I want to say is none of the other people I've ever done films about have written several autobiographies. Albie has. And the title of this film, Soft Vengeance, comes from one of Albie's autobiographies, which was called Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter.
I will ask you about later.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say that's where it came from.
Okay.
All right. Do I get to say one more thing or not?
Sure.
Okay. So I learned something from Albie that really doesn't have to do with his career. I learned from Albie about the importance of something that he calls late life love, which is what he found after he met Vanessa September, who he met and then married. And they now have a son who's now a teenager, which is actually hard for me to believe, named Oliver, named after Oliver Tambo. And one of the real benefits, one of the true, heartwarming aspects of making this film was getting to spend time with Albie and his family, both in South Africa and in the United States. And I just want to say, as I end this, because Albie will talk more about his activities around preserving the history of the Constitution and Constitution Hill in his discussions. But he has devoted many of the last years to doing that. And he said, if I want to brag about him, I can quickly tell you that he has received 25 honorary degrees from universities in 4 continents, awards from presidents of South Africa, Portugal, Brazil, and he will receive an award from President Macron of France in November. So Albie has been well recognized around the world and deserves every one of them, in my humble opinion.
Thank you,
Albie.
Thank you. And Albie, I want to say mazel tov to you on all of those great forms of recognition. And maybe you could now introduce your friend, a person who admires you, and rightly so, Albie Ginsberg.
Well, it's a wonderful, wonderful connection. I was a youngish guy in exile, traveling to California for the first time and meeting this very, very sparky student. And I'm thinking, if I had to find an adjective to describe Abby in the 1970s, it was sparky, but I didn't feel it quite captured her. She was sparky and brainy and brave and outspoken and progressive, wonderful qualities. And of course, now it's 50 years later and she's sparky and brainy and progressive and brave. So there's a kind of resilience of spirit and personality. But I didn't quite get the word. There was something. We survived making a film together. I call it survival. We fought from beginning to end, but it was a wonderful kind of fighting because we got, I wouldn't say angry with each other, but forceful with each other, not for long. Okay, you're right. We fought and we listened. And it came out, we were much stronger friends afterwards. I think making a film can often be a recipe for destruction of a friendship. But in our case, it really was cementing a friendship. And it's been a joy for me.
A wonderful way to summarize.
Yes, okay.
You
and I just want to say what was the word that I was looking for. But before that, I'm going to say the word was zestful. There's a zest that combines all those things. And it's in our latest films. A wonderful film about Barbara Lee, the only congressperson to vote against the war in Afghanistan, only one. Now, 20 years later, it seems she was right. And another film about some of the least recognized people in the world, the waitresses who live on tips. Now, who makes a film about that? Albie Ginsberg does. And before that, it was on Black Lives Matter, the early protagonists of it, the Japanese in the internment camps. There's a whole series of themes like that. She gave up life as a lawyer to become a filmmaker. I wouldn't say she did the legal profession gave a benefit by leaving law, but she certainly made filmmaking all that much better.
So we've started with a lot of mutual admiration, which I think is what you feel. And I think many redheads have been called zestful. And it sounds like she looks like what she is. So Albie, I'm going to start with you. And could we have the first slide, please? Albie, your parents were Litvaks who came from Europe. Do you remember what year they arrived?
So there she is. Rachel Ginsberg, she married Ollie Sachs. That gives you some idea of their backgrounds. And she was, for many people, Comrade Ray. They met in the Young Communist League and grew up very radical, very independent. My dad was expelled from the Communist Party for right-wing deviationism, which was a very serious offense in those days. But he carried on his work as the organizer of the Garment Workers Union. And they were separated. And my mom worked for the General Secretary of the Communist Party, a black man. So I grew up in a home where my mom, a white woman, was saying, tidy up, Uncle Moses is coming. But Uncle Moses wasn't Moses Cohen, it was Moses Kutani.
Your brother Johnny, what did he decide to do?
So Johnny, in a way, followed in their footsteps and in my footsteps, and he became a doctor, an immunologist. Sadly, he had rheumatic fever as a child before we had drugs to deal with rheumatic fever. And he died about 10, 15 years ago after having 5 open heart operations.
My gosh.
A very wonderful brother and friend and colleague.
So were your parents born in South Africa or in Europe?
In Lithuania. You can see my dad, Solly.
Yes. Here you are.
Dressed in that 3-piece suit, and then me with my blazer. I was at the South African College School, Sachs. So I was Sachs from Sachs for 10 years. And the boys used to say, sack, bag, bottles, and rags. In any event, he was now going to go on the boat because people didn't take aeroplanes those days unless you were supremely rich, to Europe and the United States on trade union labor matters.
So you must have gotten very special values from your family, with the communist belief in all people being equal, maybe also class warfare. I don't know, but I think some of those values showed in your later work. And
yes, and if I can just say that, you mentioned class warfare. A lot of the people who came on the boat as youngsters under 10 from Lithuania ended up, they were tailors and they became garment factory owners. And my dad would play poker with them. And some people say, how can you speak to the class enemy? How can you play poker with the class enemy? And he said, class struggle is class struggle and poker is poker. And I mention that because that kind of humor was something that I see as coming with my Litvak community. And a sense of, how can I say, we didn't fit in anywhere, but we fitted in everywhere.
That's well put, very well put.
The Jews that I identified with would be people like Karl Marx and Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud, who had that love of knowledge and ideas and concern about the universe. And that's something that came through. Even though my dad had a slight trace of an accent until he died in age 76, in 1976, he loved books and ideas and thought. He discovered Beethoven when he was 70. He wanted to introduce me to the music of Beethoven. And I loved that ongoing passion. He was very argumentative. And at his cremation at Golders Green crematorium, where many refugee Jews were cremated from Eastern Europe and so on, Sam Kahn, who made the eulogy, said, I'm sure if God exists, Solly is arguing with him right now.
That's lovely. I can see all those traits in you because you like a good joke too. What was the first prong or prod that got you involved in the anti-apartheid movement?
Well, I grew up in that strong world of ideas and radical and so on, and I hated my parents assuming I'd automatically follow in their footsteps. And very surprisingly, actually, I suppose looking back, it was a lecture given by an Afrikaans writer named Eys Krige on a Spanish poet, Federico Lorca, that got me into the struggle, because Krige had been to Spain at the end of the Spanish Civil War, and he spoke with enormous passion about the Spanish poet who was executed by the fascists, a los cinco de la tarde. And for me, it did something very profound. I love poetry. And what this did was to pull poetry from being inward and intimate and personal and lonely, connected it up with the big events of the world. So I came into politics as a romantic. I came in bringing culture in with me. I didn't bring culture into the movement. Culture got me into the movement. And I think that's been quite an important part of my political expression, learning to get out of my tight white skin and to move and to sing, and to join in and move in the streets and a whole range of things. It was a very enriching experience.
It was a whole culture. It was a whole culture for you.
Oh, yes, singing, people, music, song, dance, body, high culture, discovering Picasso, Pablo Neruda, and all of that was part of that panoply.
And you said, this is for me. But
Yes.
first you went to law school. And
I was already at law school.
when this
And,
happened. Yeah.
and you know, Shula, I would write the essays for the professors who loved the rule of law. Constitutionalism wasn't strong in South Africa in those days, but the rule of law and justice and equity. But my real passion was night schools down in the townships with just candles in a little shack. The people hated the law. The law was the police that locked them up, that chased them, but they would give their lives for justice. The professors loved the law but wouldn't give their lives for justice. And it was only years later, when we came to write our constitution, that I was able to connect the divided Albie, who wanted to love the law and pursue justice. It brought the courage and the sacrifice and the endeavor of the poor together with the great ideas of the ages. And that was the foundation of our constitution, constitutional court, and of my whole life as a lawyer.
What's so beautiful about what you're saying to me, one of the things, is it wasn't anger that brought you to the movement, or a desire to hurt somebody, or to to destroy something. It was to bring culture, to enjoy one another, and to see what kind of society you could create. Now, at that time, were you a little unusual, or were there a lot of white people or white Jewish people who were involved in the ANC? Because that became your route to participation.
Yeah. There weren't a hell of a lot of whites who really joined the resistance. There were quite a few whites who were anti-apartheid. Quite a few who had fought against Hitler, came back, anti-racist. Others would be lawyers, doctors, professionals, accountants, would support the anti-apartheid struggle, but would say, I have to look after my family, and wouldn't get involved. So maybe, I don't know, maybe 100 whites. It's not a hell of a lot. And of the 100, maybe 60 or 70 happened to be Jews.
I don't know if that's happened to be, but we will discuss that at another point.
Yeah.
And I have read that when apartheid was so strong, some Jewish families decided to leave South Africa, but you and your family stayed. Is that because you wanted to engage in the next historical period? Did you see something changing that you could be part of?
Oh, I never had a doubt. When I left, eventually, it was after 2 spells in solitary confinement. I was too weak to carry on in the underground, almost too strong to leave, but eventually I left to carry on the struggle outside. It was very humiliating for me, but it was my form of survival. I was about to be thrown out of my practice as an advocate for political reasons, and I just felt myself getting feebler and feebler. My mom stayed. My dad, when he was banned from carrying on trade union activities, went to London, but to carry on the struggle from there.
Right.
He joined the British Labour Party. He got very close to trade unions. He helped to raise funds for defense of people in South Africa, and was one of the founders of the anti-apartheid movement.
Oh, really? Wow.
In London.
I did not know that. So you could not survive in South Africa because of your own health. So what you did was you, in a sense, imposed exile on yourself. You were denied citizenship. Is that true within South Africa?
So the condition for leaving, being allowed to leave, is to be stateless. I was stateless for 7 years. I had to get a special document, special visa to visit any country, sit in those queues at the office waiting, just for a simple trip to France.
I understand. My parents happen to have been stateless as well and have said that. They're not from South Africa. Then you missed Africa and you decided you wanted to go to Mozambique. And here is a slide of you with Ruth First, who was also a South African Jewish woman, very involved in the anti-apartheid movement. Did you have a close relationship with her?
You know, when I came out of prison in South Africa, I wrote a book called 168 Days secretly, and I sent it through to her to get it published in London. And she said she couldn't, but she would help find a publisher. Why she couldn't? Because she had written a book called 118 Days, the time she spent in prison. Eventually, when I get to London, she makes a film for BBC about her time in prison, and the Royal Shakespeare Company put on a play based on my jail diary book, broadcast by the BBC. So we're following each other. She goes to Mozambique, to the University of Eduardo Mondlane to teach, and I go to Mozambique to teach in the law faculty. So we were like following each other. Neither of us was in the military, in the deep underground. Both of us were intellectuals. She was older than me. She wrote many, many books. I only written a few books. And this picture was taken, you can see her eating in Mozambique. It was a few months before she was blown up and killed by a parcel bomb.
Sadly, you're following her, you followed her in this way as well. She was actually killed there, showing the reach of the South African military. And then in 1988, could we have the next slide, please? You had this terrible accident. You lost an eye and half an arm, which everyone can see there.
Okay, I always correct you. I didn't lose an eye, I lost the sight in an eye.
Okay,
I don't know why it means so much to me to make that difference, but there you are. And with me there is my great friend Wolfie Kodesh, who'd fought against Hitler, and he became like my manager in hospital because I was under an assumed name in case South African security finished off the job with poison, which is what they've been doing in Southern Africa. And he was the one who told who the visitors could be. And he had hidden Mandela for many, many months in his apartment when Mandela was underground. And one of the examples, if you like, of Jews who threw themselves wholeheartedly into the struggle in South Africa. He's a wonderful, wonderful friend. And here I am recovering in hospital. And I must say I was joyous. You can see I'm looking happy. I should be looking miserable, but I'm looking happy because I'd survived. That moment, you're in the freedom struggle. Will the enemy come? Will they come today? Will I be brave? And they tried to kill me and I had survived. And I had a total conviction that as I got better, my country would get better.
Beautiful. That is really wonderful. And you've survived also because you received good care, I presume, in London, which is why you went there. And then you decided to go back to South Africa. Could we see the next slide, please?
That's Rachel Ginsberg, Ray Ginsberg at the airport with Avis in the background. And I'm back home. And it was on our terms. We knew we were going to make a constitution. We'd get democracy in South Africa. I'd get what I call my soft vengeance. My soft vengeance is not to do to them what they had done to us. My soft vengeance was democracy, was the rule of law, was freedom. That's much more powerful than doing to them what they did to us. It justifies everything. I wasn't angry because I was oppressed. I was a volunteer in the struggle. So I was
Albie,
joyous that we are
Albie,
now achieving the things we set out to achieve.
and Nelson Mandela, who was the leader of the African National Congress and was becoming the leader of the new South Africa, he turned to you and probably other people and said, help us create a new constitution, a constitution that would describe our goals for the society we want to have. Here is Nelson Mandela, everyone recognizes his face, and Albie is the most smiling one here, and he's way in the back. So I have to tell you, Albie, the constitution that you created with your colleagues is a beautiful document. It's worth everybody who's listening to this to read, and it's all online. You can read it. Could you tell me how the process of creating these wonderful ideas and embedding them in a constitution and then creating laws around them so that those ideas would become part of society? How did that process work?
It took us 4 years. We had 2 stages of constitution making. We had general elections. We had breakdowns. We had assassinations. It was very, very rough. But in the end, 490 elected people in parliament with 2 years, according to certain principles agreed to in advance, brought out that beautiful, beautiful constitution. I was on the constitutional court by then, so I wasn't part of that last process. But I get so distressed when people say, oh, Albie Sachs wrote the South African Constitution. It was really teamwork over a long period of time with huge inputs, but we could draw on the best from all over the world. We're very, very proud of that Constitution.
And you should be, you told me for the first time your story of the poem that inspired you. In a sense, when I read the Constitution of South Africa, it's like a poem. It's like the most lofty, wonderful ideas. Of course, the US Constitution was written in the late 1700s, and many of the ideas that had evolved from them were not yet articulated. And there are real problems with it. But you're maybe in part because you wrote yours 200 years later, it embodies the best. Now
that's exactly what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, and
well,
got her into a whole heap of trouble for saying that. I had the joy of taking her around for a week in South Africa, visiting the Constitutional Court, arguing with her about one case I was involved in. The students were all amazed to see these 2 judges fighting with each other. I'd had very good training with Abby, and it was a marvelous visit. And she pointed to the fact that after the changes in Cairo, Tahrir Square, don't look to the American Constitution, look to the South African Constitution. And Ruth and I had a very, very, very special friendship. I brought her a collar made by a South African artist, Kim Lieberman, a very special, beautiful lace collar, not long before COVID. And I had to wait because Ruth was doing her exercises with a trainer, introduced me to a trainer. And I commented to her, Ruth, coming in, I see 3/4 of the books in the library are about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and almost all the rest were about Sonia Sotomayor. And I said, isn't that amazing? And she said, and I'm sure I'm not speaking out of turn now, it's actually because of Donald Trump. She was the total opposite in physique, in size, in spirit, in line, in everything. And one result was people, I think, rallied around her, what she stood for, that sense of total, utter integrity. It was a very beautiful, very, very special relationship.
Albie, we are about 2 minutes ahead of ourselves, but I have to ask you one last question. You have been given a lot of credit for bringing public art to South Africa, and your perception or your conviction that art is an important part of your life. That is so evident when you go to Constitution Hill and you see all the art there. Do you want to say anything about that before we close?
Yes, and I think you wanted me to mention there were 3 Jews on the Constitutional Court. Arthur Chaskelson, the head of the court, became Chief Justice, Richard Goldstone and Albie Sachs. And I think that helped because all our community were very art conscious. Arthur appointed me and Yvonne Mokgoro to be in charge of decor, and we seized that opportunity. Decor now was to make a court that didn't look like a copy of a court of a copy of a court with a woman of the scales of justice. We wanted real South African art, diverse, expressing the struggle for freedom, humanity, and the court went along with it. And so we ended up with a wonderful collection, mainly donated from some famous artists like William Kentridge and Marlene Dumas, from people who don't even know they're artists, tapestries, weaving, carpets, chandeliers, everything. And for me, it's part and parcel of the spirit of justice. Justice is not cold, justice is warm. Justice is not implacable, justice is giving and feeling and is full of all the seasons of the year, spring, autumn, summer, and winter. And that you get from art, and you get it, I hope, in the finest writing, the finest thoughts, the finest expression of judicial reasoning of the best judges.
Albie, unfortunately, we have to bring this section to a close. I have to say one thing, which I know you will not agree with, which is you could have been a rabbi.
It's been said many times, and then many rabbis have tried to recruit me.
Oh, okay, then I'll take it back. I'm not trying to recruit you. I'm just saying that there are, I don't know if you know this, but there are 36 tzaddikim in the world, good people who, and because they exist, and they usually don't know that they are a tzaddik, God lets the world continue to exist, as he did in Sodom, when Abraham said, don't kill everybody in Sodom, and God said, why not? And he says, because there's a few good people here. So thank you. Thank you for everything you have done and for all you're teaching us. And now I would like to turn the attention to Abby. Is that all right with you, Albie?
Sure. Don't get mixed up, the Abby and the Albie.
I know. So Abby, we heard your lovely story about how Albie first said no, and then said maybe, and then it was the greatest experience of both of your lives, more or less. What did you learn from Albie?
I learned a lot.
Okay, tell us.
I was thinking about this. I thought maybe somebody would ask me this. So I actually was thinking about what did I learn from Albie.
Very good.
Great time. Okay, but here's the thing that as a filmmaker, when you make a film and you have your biographical subject with you, you spend a lot of time as a potted plant sitting behind them at public settings. So this is very sweet that anybody's asking me a question. And what I learned from Albie is that you could never anticipate, even if you'd done the same Q&A some other day and some other part of the week or whatever, his answers were always unique, always surprising. And I found that extremely refreshing. So I felt like I could never exactly anticipate what Albie was going to say. And that made it really fun for us to kind of go out in the world together. I learned a lot of other things, about, I think it takes us back to the title of Soft Vengeance. And, it's like, what was unique about Albie that meant that he could say, no, please do not go kill somebody else because of what they tried to do to me, but let's try to fight for justice and democracy in South Africa because that's what the goal is here. It's not an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Well, I don't know, when you spend as much time as I did with Albie, that lesson imprints in a very dramatic way. So
especially since he had lost the sight in one eye, and he lost, and he didn't lose an arm, he lost half an arm. So you see the evidence of violence, and yet he was not interested in.
Well, he was not interested in either retribution or, as I say, an eye for an eye approach to this whole thing. And I guess I learned something else from Albie, which is, it's like different people experience joy in different ways, but Albie's joy is actually close to the surface. His joy about being alive. I mean, you get it when you sort of look at the early footage right after right after the bomb explosion. It's like he went from I almost died to I am so grateful to be alive, and I feel like he has taken that I'm so grateful to be alive meta message throughout his life, and I think some of that rubbed off on me. So that when I'm in my, when I mean, we just spent 4 years under Trump. There were a lot of times where you had to remind yourself you were glad to be alive to fight another day. And I think I got some of that from Albie.
On your film, is it on your film, Abby, that we hear him say the funniest thing? That somebody was trying to say that this bomb was actually intended for that person. And he said, no,
that's my bomb.
That's my bomb.
Don't take that story from me. Yeah, that's in my film. I don't know what that means.
Forget it.
Yeah, but
that was so funny. And it was a way of kind of charging the incident so that people could compete about who that bomb was intended for.
Okay, and I guess I want to say one other thing, which is, I mean, Albie's, we don't use the word Renaissance man that often, but Albie really is one. And his sort of encyclopedic knowledge of a lot of stuff that I don't know very much about was also sort of a fabulous little kind of education for me. And so I just appreciate, let me just say this to Albie. Albie, I so appreciated working on this project and, being able to bring some more of you kind of into my heart, into my soul, into my mind. I just feel like I am a more interesting person for it. And so thank you for being willing to partner with me on this project, because it was a really meaningful experience for me that has, survived many years since we issued the film.
Now, I want to ask you, what happened next? You produced the film was complete, and I know you showed it around America and you showed it around South Africa. Were the responses the same? Were they different?
So we hired somebody in South Africa to set up screenings with high school students, and she had good connections because she'd done this before. And so we had a number of screenings with essentially all Black high school students from various townships, both in Cape Town and in Soweto. And boy, was that an eye-opening experience, because number one, they were learning that there were white people like Albie who were involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. That was not necessarily a fact they knew before they saw the film. So that was kind of interesting. And we also went to a number of largely Black colleges, colleges with mostly Black students, kind of out in the boonies, not in the major cities. And again, I was so moved by their ability, by the students' ability to sort of meet and embrace and want to know about Albie. And the main question they kept asking him was, you were a white person with privilege. Why did you join our struggle? And Albie should tell you what his answer was.
Albie, what was your answer to that?
If you don't remember, I'll say it, but I think you have an answer.
Do you want to answer, Albie, or do you want Abby to do it?
No, let Abby do it, yeah.
Okay, so the answer that he gave many times, because it was really a repeating question that the students asked, was, Albie, did not want to live in a country where everybody wasn't equal. I was not fighting the fight for Black South Africans. I was fighting the fight for myself. And let me say that was a moment for those students. To hear that, to understand it, it may have been the first white person to ever say that to them. And so the film became a kind of an avenue through which discussions that the next and subsidy, we're now talking about the grandchildren of people who fought in the anti-apartheid movement, were able to learn something from one of the soldiers in that struggle. And so I just felt, I don't know what the word is, that it was incredibly rewarding, to just even bear witness to these discussions taking place in South Africa. So that for me was the major aha moment, which was that this film could play a role in teaching Black South African young people something about their own history that they might not otherwise know. And Albie and I, this is the one place where we actually did agree. We had to shorten the film from its 84 minutes to 60 minutes for these high school screenings. And Albie and I basically were on the same page about what to keep in and what to lose. And so again, the film really had legs in South Africa that were not, that was not part of my original fantasy. My original plan was to introduce Albie to an American audience. And I felt like I ended up introducing him to a much more important audience, which were young South African Black high school students.
Anything you want to say about the American audience?
I think most people were really pleased to meet him. I make movies about people whose lives intersect with the most famous people of a generation. So the fact that Albie intersected with Nelson Mandela was really important to me. But I wasn't about to do a Nelson Mandela movie. That is not the stories that I tell. I am so much more interested in and inspired by the people that no one's ever heard of, that I, for whatever reason, have been fortunate enough to meet in the course of my own work and life. So Albie was a perfect subject for me because he was not as well known as I hoped he would be once my movie got out. And I would say, yeah, we've had some success with that.
You have.
Yes.
You definitely have. You have put Albie on the map. Not only
that was the goal. So good. I'm happy.
Not just London, Mozambique, and South Africa, but the world.
Okay.
And thank you so much for your story, and thank you for sitting in front of that poster behind you, which looks so attractive as a background piece. And now I would like to turn the show over to Olivia, who has some news to share with you.
So we will get to your questions in just a few moments. Right now, I want to urge you all to sign up for our upcoming programs. After today's program, you will receive an email with information about some of our upcoming events, and I urge you all to sign up. So next week, we are featuring the life story of a woman named Corinne Neox Chateau. And that's a story having to do with the rescue of memory. So that's quite interesting. It's a film called Safer in Silence. So we will have her here next week in conversation with the film critic Annette Insdorf. And I hope that you will sign up for that because it should be quite fascinating. The week following, we are featuring the story of that famous Klimt painting that was looted by the Nazis. It was Klimt's Lady in Gold or Woman in Gold, portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer. And we are meeting the author who first broke the story in the Los Angeles Times of what happened to this family and the bequest for restitution. So that's the idea of rescuing a culture. So next week, rescuing memory, the following week, rescuing the culture. Then the week following, we are featuring the fascinating story of the catcher who was a spy, and that is the Jewish-American baseball player Mo Berg, and that is another really fascinating true story. Right now, we will see the trailer for next week's film called Safer in Silence.
For thousands of years, your roots are from our people, so I don't think you want to be the one to
disconnect. No, obviously I've been on this search and I've been trying to really put the pieces back together.
It's almost like you throw a stone into a big body of water and you see all these concentric circles forming, getting wider and wider.
We have to solve this mystery.
Yeah.
Who are you?
You have nothing of Jewish people. We are taught in our generation not to ask, to wait, not ask.
I don't quite know really where we were hiding, but we were hiding all the time.
We didn't talk about the past.
Not about the war and not about the Holocaust.
It's history. I am Unjust, and that's what I am. That's who I am.
So your father didn't know about her?
No.
She was the shame of being Jew, I would shut up.
Even for Hitler, that is nothing.
Hillary Nussbaum was famous.
Intellectual aristocracy.
What kind of scientist was he?
Psychiatrist.
She has such a family.
I know.
My mother, she doesn't know any of this.
To me, it's painful. I don't like to talk about things which are not pleasant.
And so it's like this in all families. And you know, you've got the shiny side, and then the other one.
The shadow.
You won't get the shadow because they won't tell you.
Her big thing was, it always comes back. Anti-Semitism always comes back.
He didn't leave. He doesn't come back. He didn't leave.
It didn't leave.
So I hope you will sign up for that program and the programs to come. And now I'm going to turn the program back to Shulamit for Q&A.
You have asked a lot of interesting questions. Those of you who have sent them in the chat. And I'm going to read one. And Albie, if you could answer it briefly, we can get through a lot of questions. The first one is by Susan Feldstein. My husband and I visited your beautiful country 2 years ago. And I'm quoting her, with all the corruption and crime, do you think there is hope for your country?
Absolutely, yes. Because we know about the corruption, it's being denounced, it's out there in public. We know about the crime, it's denounced. Our president was the principal coordinator of our new constitution. He believes very much in constitutionalism and the rule of law. And the people denounce the corruption. The people denounce the crime. So we've got all the ingredients of getting the country right.
Excellent. And now I'm having a little trouble finding the questions. I don't know why. Let me just say, somebody wanted to know about a South African Jewish woman named Helen, who was very instrumental in the freedom of the country.
Helen Sussman.
Yes. So, and which is spelled Z-U-S? No. How do you spell Sussman? S-U-Z-M-A-N, something like that.
Yeah.
So do you want to speak for a minute about Helen Sussman?
Is that me?
Yeah.
Sure. She was a great figure. She worked in Parliament, in the White Parliament. She denounced apartheid. She traveled all over the world. We disagreed on a whole range of things. She opposed divestment. She opposed the sports boycott, the other boycotts that we felt were important pressures. But she asked questions in Parliament when I was in detention. She visited Mandela. Didn't visit. She asked many questions about Mandela on Robben Island. She played a terrific role, and I'm very proud and pleased to have been able to work with her, each in our different spheres.
Right. I agree with you. Helen Sussman, I think, is a little better known in this country than some of the other freedom poets, such as yourself. You have another question from Nancy Walter, asking why you went to Mozambique. Couldn't you have just gone to South Africa?
No, because South Africa then was under white racist rule and I was allowed to leave on condition I didn't return. So technically I had to go to jail before anything else if I returned to South Africa. Mozambique had just become independent after almost 500 years of Portuguese colonial rule. And there was a sense of great ebullience and a wonderful spirit of freedom there. And I enjoyed being able to build up something. We were putting down, we were denouncing apartheid, we were attacking, and now I could, that side of me that wanted to heal and to build in the legal sphere got wonderful scope, and I got very involved in the arts movement in Mozambique. It was a very powerful, strong movement. There were more artists, sculptors, painters in Mozambique, even in a time of war, earning a living full-time from the art, than in South Africa with all its resources at that time.
That's a new fact for me. I'd like to learn more about that. Barbara Rubin asked, I am surprised that in prison they let you have paper and that you were able to write your book without the guards preventing and or taking away what you wrote. How did you get the papers and pen and keep your manuscripts?
For the first 27 days, I had the Bible, as it was called, the Old Testament and the New Testament, nothing else. And then after 27 days, the station commander comes in waving a piece of paper. If they'd listened to me, this would never have happened. And he gives it to me. I'm instructed to give it to you. And I was reading the columns, this thin paper in the Bible, rationing myself to 2.5 pages a day. I didn't know if I'd be there for eternity. And I couldn't read across the page. And I read across the page, and it's a court order. And my colleagues outside had got an order from the judges who knew me, ordering that I be allowed pencil and paper and reading matter. It saved me. I didn't write the book in prison. As soon as I came out of prison, I wrote the jail diary. It was illegal for me even to write it. It was illegal for people to print it. We had to smuggle it out.
So are you saying that in jail you did not have the pen and paper?
No, I got pen and paper.
Yes.
And I would just write down little code words.
I see. Little notes to yourself.
I didn't write the book.
I understand. Here, and a woman named Beth asks, how come your mother didn't visit you in London or in Mozambique?
She visited me once in London. She wasn't allowed a passport, and once in Mozambique.
So was she punished for your activities? Is that why she didn't have a passport?
For my activities and for her own background.
Oh. But not for things she was doing right then. I mean, was she?
No.
Did you want to say, Abby? I didn't want to cut you off.
No, I didn't. No.
Okay. Then we have Sherna Berner Gluck has asked, or Glück, which means good luck. What was his, meaning you, Albie, and the ANC's relationship with the other freedom groups like the PAC?
As a lawyer in Cape Town, I defended more PAC people than ANC, as it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And even although the PAC were critical of the ANC for having white members or white supporters, they weren't in jail for that. They were in jail for resisting apartheid. And I did those cases. I didn't take a penny for them. They were people struggling for freedom. And I was proud and happy to be able to include some of their top leaders. Philip Khosana, who led a great march on Cape Town, was in one of the trials. His slogan was no bail, no defense, no fine. So they didn't have lawyers, but they copied me. I was the only lawyer I knew. And I would say, I put it to you, Sergeant so-and-so, and I'd sit down, and then Khosana would stand up and say, I put it to you. And they were like cloning me. And then Magwebi would do the same thing, and the next one.
I see.
It was a good, warm, close relationship. And in exile, although we disagreed on a whole range of things, we tried hard not to fight in public.
And did you fight in private?
We argued in private. We were mean to each other in private.
Okay. There's a question about the first two of your sons by your first wife. I don't know if that's too personal, but the Marilyn Fishbone asks, what happened to them?
Right. So my oldest son, Alan, is an artist. He's in Cape Town. And his younger brother, Michael, ended up designing the budget for South Africa in Treasury. He's now a professor at the University of Witwatersrand. And somebody was saying recently from the civil society organizations, this Michael Sachs, that was when he was head of the budget, he's so brilliant. He's even more brilliant than his father.
Oh my God.
And I said, let me hear that again. Say it again. What did you say? I was very proud of him. And I'm very proud of my other son, Alan, as well. He's quiet, he's thoughtful, He does beautiful murals.
Well, you have quite a family. You're from your parents to your wives to your sons. Do you have a daughter? I don't remember.
No.
Okay, that's the only thing you've missed in life. And I think we'll leave it here because Olivia is going to introduce the final thoughts segment and then say goodbye for all of us.
Well, so the final thoughts is for our speakers, starting perhaps with Abby. Do you have some final thoughts you would like to share with our audience?
Just how great, sort of what I started with, which is how grateful I am to be here, to get to share this platform with Albie and with, Shulamit. What I hope about this film, I guess I'll give a pitch for the film, which is that it feels to me like it's evergreen, which means that even though we issued it a while ago, it still hopefully will be available to people so that it can inspire particularly other young people. I make films to inspire the next generation. Many of us are on our way out here. And so I really hope that
not Albie.
I know, Albie will outlive all of us. It's true. Right. So anyway, so I'm just, if your kids are in a high school or you have children that you think would be inspired by this, I hope you'll share the film with them because that's really why I made it. Albie inspired me in my lifetime more than I can say, and I really wanted his story to inspire the next generations.
Abby, is it appropriate for you to say just a word about our possible future collaboration on this other film you're talking about, or not?
I don't even know what you were. Oh no, absolutely not.
Okay, so stay tuned for.
Yeah, stay tuned. Friday night online. Okay. And let me say, let me just say this. There were references to other films. My films are all listed on something called socialactionmedia.com. That's the website. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm so glad to have had an opportunity to spend an hour with Albie.
And now, Albie, final thoughts.
Yeah, and Abby, you stole the word from me. I wanted to say evergreen, because not only are you wearing green, but to see you so full of zest. And thanks for the organizers of this program. I think we all love talking about ourselves, and sometimes it's embarrassing, and sometimes it's awkward, but it's fun because this is sparky. And Shula, you're a great provocateur, and I love being provoked in the way that I was, and I love the work that the Mendes Foundation is doing. It's again not the famous people, not the big names. But somebody in his two, yeah. Like if you like ordinary people using what space they have, and there are more people who are ordinary people than great people, and it's easier to identify with ordinary people, and I think that's what you're doing. And thank you so much for having Abby and myself on this program.
Shula, is there something you'd like to say?
What can I say? I mean, Albie is such an unusual person as a Jewish woman, and because of some of the issues that the Mendes Foundation is concerned with, I'm just so happy that we could talk to him about a little bit about that. And also you said that I'm a provocateur, Albie. I'm going to, when this is finished, I'm going to tell my husband this, and then he'll understand a lot about me that he doesn't like that much, I guess. Anyhow, thank you to Olivia. Thank you to everyone who listened and asked questions. And please see all the coming shows because they're going to be wonderful.
Great. Thanks again for a wonderful hour and see you next week. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.